Whatever the case, I'm not folding. I'm definitely not raising either. I throw in the call and then the button folds. So we heads up to a river. It's a pretty nice river. It's a king of hearts.
Hey YouTube.
G'day everyone, welcome back to the vlog. We're in our final night in Adelaide. We're about to head off to play the last game of poker up here. We're going back to the Royal Poker Club and hoping to get in a good session of 5-5, maybe 5-5-10. We'll see what happens. So without any further ado, let's get in the game. The game didn't start until about 10 p.m, so definitely a later start, but once it does, we are playing exclusively 5-5. So we buy into the game for 1,000. Let's see if we can run it up. Let's go. So to kick things off, we're playing six-handed and an unknown MP opens it to 10, so a min click open. Tight aggressive small blind throws in the call. Then I'm in the big blind with ace-9 offsuit, and I think we have a pretty clear decision to call here, getting such a good price closing the action. So we go three ways to a flop of 9-7-5 with two diamonds. Small blind checks to me. I naturally check it to the pre-flop raiser, who goes ahead and c-bets 25. Then the small blind throws in the call. So kind of an interesting decision whether we want to call or check raise here. The main benefits of check raising are basically to deny equity to the pre-flop aggressors, overcard hands like, king, queen offsuit if they're betting that. But the problem with that is if we do check raise and get called by a range that's like flush draws plus hands stronger than ours, which both the opponents have a few of, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble. So it might be a good spot to just keep a strong hand in your calling range, which is what I did. So we're still three ways to a turn, which is the queen of spades. Small blind checks it to me. I check it over to the aggressor again. Then they keep betting at it. They go ahead and make it 50. And then the small blind folds pretty quickly. So pretty interesting whether we want to call or fold here. I think at this point, check raising will be a massive overplay. We do have a few stronger hands in our range, a few queen X, like queen X of diamonds most notably. But besides that, this is actually one of the strong hands we're going to have in our range. If you consider that we're going to check raise most flops, two pair plus combos, we really only have a few two pairs of like queen X. So don't really want to be folding a hand as strong as ace-9 here. Maybe if we had a 9 with a worse kicker, I would like folding more, but not with the nut one. So I throw in the call and we're heads up to a river, which is the 10 of hearts. I go ahead and check it over to the opponent and they put in the third barrel. They go ahead and make it 100. So we're getting 3.1 to 1 on a call here. We're good 25% of the time with ace-9. I honestly think it's a really, really close spot because we do lose to queen X plus, flop two pairs. I even think flop straight would make sense for the opponent to have. Like, I don't really know them, but people tend to open wider in Adelaide, I've noticed. So if they did have ace-6 suited, I would not be shocked. But there are missed flush draws they could potentially be bluffing with. Maybe they're just triple barreling off with a hand like ace-king or ace-6 suited, for example. And if they are, it's definitely going to be a profitable call. I just think it's a bit unlikely that that is the case. I think they're going to have more queen X plus hands in their range. So I decided to fold my ace-9 here. Hop in the comments, let me know what you think. So we've got a new player at the table now and we're playing seven-handed, then a loose aggressive low jack opens it to 15. Then I'm in the hijack with 7-6 of hearts and I already had in my head that I wanted to 3-bet this opponent pretty aggressively just because I'd seen them show down some junk like 10-8 offsuit in early position. So I decided to use this hand as a 3-bet. I went ahead and made it 50. 7-6 suited, probably a bit too loose. Might be better using like king-jack offsuit or something. Whatever the case, I did 3-bet it. And then I get a call from the button, the small blind, as well as the original raiser. So we are playing a bloated pot four ways, and then the flop is king 8-6 with two clubs. So bottom pair for us. When the action checks to me, I think we have a pretty clear decision to check here. Really don't want to be betting bottom pair into three different ranges, all of which probably have ace-king offsuit except for the original raiser. So I decide to check it, and the button does too. So we get a free turn. It's a good one. It's the 7 of diamonds. Let's go. We do make two pair. And then the small blind leads out for 85. The original raiser folds. And interesting whether we want to call or raise here. I think the merit to raising is to just build a bigger pot against a strong king X hand. Like I said, the opponents can have a lot of ace king and king queen in their range. And they're probably going to call a raise now. Also flush draws we can try and get value from as well. So maybe raising is a better play. I decided to just call, probably a bit too cautious in this instance. I really think the button's just going to fold most of the time on this turn when they don't bet the flop. So yeah, probably just missing a bit of value by just calling here. But I did throw in the call and then we get to see a river, which is the queen of spades. The opponent checks it over to me. We have a pretty clear value bet here, I think, and I think I want to use a large sizing too, just to try and maximize value against the ace-king combinations in my opponent's range. So I go ahead and bet 250. and then the opponent snap folds. So yeah, can't really get any more value there when the opponent snap folds. Don't think they had much of a strong hand at all. Next hand, I'm under the gun with ace-queen offsuit. I raise it up to 15, and then I get 3 different callers. So we're 4 ways to a flop of queen 10-9 with 2 spades. The big blind checks it to me, and I think this is a good spot to check. I'm really concerned that all 3 of the opponents have basically all of the 2-pair plus combos in all of their ranges on this board, and betting it here will be a bit of an overplay in my opinion. So I check it over to the hijack. It goes ahead and bets 100, and then the cutoff throws in the call. The big blind folds, so facing this large of a bet on this board, I'm very, very concerned I'm behind. I actually think both of the opponents still have a lot of 2-pair plus combos in their range. Like even the cutoff, even though they just flattered, I think with a hand like queen 10 offsuit, they're probably not going to go ahead and raise on this flop, just being concerned that the hijack could have all of the king jack offsuit combinations. So very, very concerned I'm behind here. And the only reason I would consider calling is because we do have the backdoor nut flush draw, but we're just not playing that deep at all with either opponent. I think it's a good spot to go ahead and put my hand in the muck, which is what I end up doing. Hop in the comments, let me know what you think of that decision. But fortunately, we do get to see the rest of the hand play out because the turn is the 5 of diamonds, and the hijack goes ahead and rips it all in for about 200. Then the cutoff tanks a little bit before throwing in the call. The river's a 9 of hearts, and then the hijack turns over jack 9 offsuit. So there you go. They had an open ender and bottom pair on the flop. They end up rivering trips, and the cutoff mucks. Next hand, I'm in the low jack with the second greatest hand in all of poker, pocket kings. I raise it up to 15, then I get a call from the cutoff, the button, and the small blind. So we go 4 different ways to a flop, and it's a pretty nice one. It is king, queen, jack with 2 diamonds. So top set on a pretty connected board. Small blind checks it over to me, and I definitely want to go ahead and bet my top set here, get any value from a 10x hand, or even some of the worst 2 pairs. Probably will be reluctant to put money in on later streets, considering there's so many straights and better 2 pairs out there. So I go ahead and bet 30, and then the button and the small blind call. So we're still 3 ways to a turn, which is the 9 of spades, putting out backdoor spades. Definitely not the turn card we wanted to see. Any 10 makes a straight now, and things get even worse when the small blind leads out for 50. I think considering they bet less than a third of the pot, absolutely no way we can fold here, but I definitely do think they're going to have a lot of 10x in their range. Also somewhat possible they're turning a hand like a 1 pair or even 2 pairs into a bluff, and maybe the smaller sizing is indicative of that. Whatever the case, I'm not folding. I'm definitely not raising either. I throw in the call, and then the button folds. So we heads up to a river. It's a pretty nice river. It's a king of hearts. Let's go. We river quads. The small blind checks it over to me. Now I definitely want to go ahead and bet for value, but I think it's a very interesting sizing spot in terms of how much we want to bet. I think my opponent's going to have a bunch of 10x in their range. Trying to figure out what's the biggest size they'll call here. And in my head, I thought it will be like pretty rare that a live player is going to check fold a turn straight. So I decided to go ahead and bet 250, a bit under the size of the pot. In retrospect, I think this is a bit of a mistake. I think it's very face up that I'm going to have a full house or quads in this spot. So I probably should just be using a smaller size to give 10x a better price. Whatever the case, I make what I think is a mistake and bet 250, and then the small blind is in the tank for probably a good 10 seconds or so before folding their hand. So maybe we messed up that hand and they would have called a smaller bet. Next up, a tight aggressive player limps under the gun, and then the small blind checks, and I'm in the big blind with ace-9 of diamonds. I go ahead and ISO raise it to 40 here. I could potentially see just checking back sometimes, seeing a free flop, particularly when a tight aggressive player limps in early position. That is a bit suspicious in all honesty, but can't go wrong with ISO raising either. I go ahead and make a 40, and then under the gun calls, and the small blind folds. So it heads up to a flop of 9-8-6 with 2 diamonds. So pretty good flop for us. Top pair, top kicker, and the nut flush draw. Interesting whether I want to bet or not. I would like betting here with such a strong hand, with so much equity, but I am still a bit suspicious of the under the gun player limp calling, and I think maybe they're going for like a set mine, or maybe they have like king queen suited or something like that, and a lot of those hands are just going to fold if I bet, so it's probably better to just check it over to them and induce some bluff/protection bets from those hands. So that's what I go ahead and do. I check it, then under the gun bets 40, and I throw in the call. So we get to see a turn, which is the 6 of clubs, repeating bottom pair. I go ahead and check it over to the opponent again. I don't see any reason why I would lead out on this turn card. And then under the gun goes ahead and bets 130. Again, I think we have a pretty easy call. My opponent could be bluffing with like king, queen suited. So I go ahead and throw in the call, hoping they continue to bluff on the river. We get to see the river, which is the 8 of hearts, repeating the board yet again. I go ahead and check it over to the opponent again. Then they check back pretty much straight away and show pocket kings. So we were right to be a bit suspicious of their under the gun limp call range, but I didn't think they were quite that strong, to be honest. Next up, I'm on the button with King Jack offsuit. I raise it up to 15. Then I get a call from the same player in the previous hand in the small blind, and then a more loose aggressive big blind goes ahead and 3-bets it to 50. Now, I really don't think King Jack offsuit is a great hand to defend against a 3-bet. Even in position, it just doesn't play well against a range of hands that has like basically every ace king and king queen combination. Having said that, though, we are getting a great price to call, and I think the small blind will probably overcall pretty often, so we're just getting great odds to play a pot, particularly when we're over 1,000 effective. So I go ahead and throw in the call here, and the small blind does actually fold. So we're heads up to a flop of queen 3 deuce with 2 spades, and the big blind goes ahead and c-bets 45. Now, I think we want to call in this spot, considering that we're over 1,000 effective with the villain. There's going to be a lot of great runouts for us to represent, potentially a flush, or we can backdoor a straight pretty often as well. And if my opponent does have a hand like ace king or ace jack that they're just blindly c-betting, then it's going to be pretty easy for us to fold out those hands and take it down. And we don't want to just continue with stronger hands like a pair or a flush draw, just because we do want to have some hands in our bluffing range when we want to make EV by bluffing. So I think King Jack with the King of Spades is a great hand to put in my defending range. So I throw in the call, and then we get to see a turn, which is the 8 of Spades. So we do turn the second nut flush draw, and then the opponent goes ahead and checks it over to me. Now, my plan was to bluff on any spade run out, and we've hit our spade, so we absolutely have to bluff here. I go ahead and bet 125. Don't need to size that large. It's going to be pretty easy for us to fold our opponent off of an ace-high type hand unless they have the ace of spades, so I really don't need to risk that much. I make 125, and the big blind throws in the call. So not quite what we were hoping for, but we do get to see a river, which is the 2 of hearts. Does pair bottom pair, but otherwise pretty strong brick. We do not make a flush. Big blind checks it over to me again, and now I definitely want to keep bluffing here. I'm going to have a bunch of flushes in my range. I could even be going for thin value with king queen myself, maybe ace queen that didn't 4-bet I could go for value with as well. And I definitely want to balance that range out with some bluffs, because I do think it's going to be pretty hard for my opponent to hold on with any hand that's not queen x or better. So I go ahead and bet 250, and then my opponent folds their hand. Let's go. We get the triple barrel bluff through. Come on. Next hand, a tight aggressive player opens under the gun for 20, then the hijack calls, and I'm on the button with ace king of clubs. Let's go. I go ahead and 3-bet it up to 80, then the action gets back round to the original under the gun razor. They actually decide to 4-bet it to 280. The hijack folds, so we're facing a pretty large 4-bet here, for about 1.3 thousand effective with under the gun. So pretty interesting with what we want to do here. I consider all 4 options. I think folding a bit too tight. The opponent is definitely going to have at least some 4-bet bluffs, which we're going to be absolutely smashing with ace king. But don't really like 5-betting either, just because I think if we 5-bet and then the opponent goes all in, like we're only getting it in against better hands, so that's really not an ideal scenario. So really the only option I'm left with is calling. Calling kind of sucks, just because if we don't hit an ace or a king, it's going to be pretty easy for the opponent to bluff us off the hand. But considering all the options we have, I feel like that one's maybe the best. Maybe with 5-betting being the second best option. Hop in the comments below, let me know what you would do in this spot. But I did decide to throw in the call. So we're heads up to a flop of queen 6-4 with 2 spades and 1 club. So unfortunately, we don't get there with our ace or our king. And then the under the gun player takes a little bit before moving all in for about 1.1k. So massive overbet of the pot here, almost 2x the size of the pot. I'm getting a 1.5 to 1 on a call. Should be a pretty easy fold with ace high, right? I am absolutely crushed if my opponent has pocket kings plus. But having said that, I'm not totally convinced that the opponent would just open rip it all in here. Kings, aces, or pocket queens. Like, you'd think that they want to eke out a bit of value. And if they do this with kings, like, they're going to be value owning themselves pretty hard if I did flat with aces or I have queens myself. So feels like it might be a bit too thin with those hands. So I do take a while actually considering hero calling with ace high, particularly with the one that has the backdoor nut flush here. But after a long tank, I just really think maybe I'm overestimating my opponent's ability to go for thin value. And even if they're shoving here with kings, like it's probably a good spot to deny equity to a hand like ace king, right? So I do end up deciding to fold this hand. Next hand, I'm in the cutoff with pocket kings yet again. I go ahead and raise it to 15. Then a loose aggressive big blind throws in the call. So it heads up to a flop of 10-4-3 with two spades. So a very, very wet board. When the big blind checks it over to me, definitely want to go ahead and start building a pot with my pocket kings here. I choose to use a larger sizing, just being that there's so many combinations of hands, draws, top pairs, and single pairs that can call us. So I go ahead and make it 35. And then the big blind check raises it to 105. So I'm somewhat concerned that they could have flopped 2 pair plus. I think getting such a good price call in the big blind when we're over 1.2k effective, 10-4 suited and 10-3 suited are definitely in their range. But we're going to still be ahead of a lot of their semi-bluff draws, and it's not impossible that they would check raise a hand like Queen 10, King 10, or Ace 10 on this board. So I throw in the call, and then we get to see a turn, which is the Queen of Hearts, putting out backdoor hearts, just making the board even more wet now. Big blind keeps at it. They go ahead and bet 160. And facing a bet this size, I definitely think we want to defend with pocket kings specifically. We're going to have a lot of floats on this flop that are just ace-high type hands, flush draws, and when we do have one of the more stronger pairs in our range, like pocket kings, I think it's a pretty mandatory defend. Plus, if my opponent did check raise the flop with a hand like Queen Jack of Spades, they definitely could just be betting that hand for value. So there's actually some hands in their value range that we beat, let alone the semi-bluffs. So I throw in the call, and we're going to play out a river. The river is the 7 of hearts, so definitely not the best river in the world. We do lose to 6-5, as well as the backdoor hearts did get in as well. And then the opponent goes ahead and bet 225. So we're getting about 3.5 to 1 on a call. So great odds, but are we good 22% of the time? We're with pocket kings here. I'm really not sure. I do think it's very likely the opponent could have 5-6 suited, or they backdoored a flush, or they just did flop 2 pair or a set. All of those hands make all the world of sense to me. And when I look at the potential bluffs they have, I guess front door spades is somewhat possible. Ace 5 of spades. I guess if they could have 10-4 suited, they could probably have like Jack 5 suited spades as well they're using as a bluff. But the thing is, do they take a bluff line with all of their missed spades when those hands block some of my potential folds, particularly when they're using a smaller sizing? I'm really not sure. This might be a good spot to make an exploitative fold. Having said that though, if we're going to defend any combination of pocket kings, having the king of hearts is a great card because it does block my opponent's backdoor hearts. So with all of that in mind, I did decide in game to throw in the call, defending my range with the pocket kings with a heart, and then my opponent shows me 10-4 of diamonds. So very disappointed to see that they did flop 2 pair there, partially because I actually think if I did raise on the river, definitely would have been able to get them off of that hand representing backdoor hearts or the 5-6 myself, but calling isn't going to do it this time and they rack in that pot. Next hand, a tight aggressive player opens under the gun for 15, and then a loose aggressive +1 player goes ahead and 3-bets it to 45, and the action folds around to my hijack, and I look down at ace 9 of clubs. Should be a pretty trivial fold, right? Normally I'd agree with that, but like I said, the +1 player has been playing very loose aggressive. I honestly think the chances they have absolute peanuts in their hand is very likely. So the only person I really need to get through to successfully pull off this 4-bet bluff is the under the gun player, whom I think might put me on a tighter range of hands, being that I have been a bit less active at this table. So despite the fact that I don't have the most ideal 4-bet bluff hand, I still think this is a really good spot to go for it. So that's what I do. I go ahead and 4-bet it up to a 115. The action folds back around to under the gun, and they sort of make a big show and dance and then end up folding their cards. And then the +1 player thinks for a little bit before throwing in the call. So it heads up to a flop of ace king deuce with 2 hearts and 1 diamond. +1 checks it over to me, and I think this is a slam dunk spot to have a range bet in position on the ace king high board. So I go ahead and make it 70. Probably could use an even smaller sizing than 70 to be honest, but not that big a deal either way. I make it 70, and then the opponent takes a little bit before throwing in the call. So we do get to see a turn, which is the 5 of hearts putting out backdoor hearts. The opponent checks it over to me, and now I definitely want to have some ace-x in my check-back range here, just to balance out my range when I do have stuff like pocket queens or pocket jacks or even maybe pocket tens. I just don't want to only have those type of hands when I checks, so definitely going to put some aces in there. And considering this is one of the worst ace-x hands I can potentially have, I think it's a good spot to check it back and potentially induce bluffs on the river from my opponent. So I go ahead and check it back, and then we get to see a river, which is the queen of clubs. The opponent checks it over to me again, and I think I just have to check it back in this spot. The chances my opponent is calling a bet with a hand like ace-8 or ace-4, I guess. There's just not that many worse ace-x hands that will call a bet. Like those hands definitely might fold on this river, putting me on queens or ace-queen. So I really think I'm pretty happy to just take my showdown value and really hoping my opponent doesn't show me king-queen or something like that. So I check it back, show my hand, then the opponent shows the king of diamonds before mucking their other cards. So let's go. We end up 4-bet bluffing and raking in a bigger pot as a result. Next hand, loose aggressive cutoff opens it up to 15. Then I'm on the button with pocket jacks. I go ahead and 3-bet it to 50. Then I actually get a call from the small blind, as well as a tight aggressive big blind, and the original raiser actually decides to fold. So we've gone 3 different ways to a flop of 996 rainbow. When the action checks to me, I definitely want to go ahead and c-bet here with a hand of strongest jacks, try and build a bit of a pot, but don't need to go too big when either of the opponents could have a hand like 10-9 suited or ace-9 suited perhaps. So I go ahead and make it 75, then the small blind folds and the big blind throws in the call. So it heads up to the turn, which is the 4 of clubs, completing the 4-card rainbow. The opponent checks it over to me again, and I really want to keep betting for value here. When my opponent overcalls a cold call of a 3-bet, I do think they're going to have a lot of hands like pocket pairs in their range, and stuff like pocket 10s, pocket 8s, pocket 7s are probably going to continue on this turn card, being that, there's no overcards to the board other than the 2 9s. So I think it's a good spot to keep going for value, potentially bluff with some hands like king-queen suited or jack-10 suited. So I go ahead and bet 200, and then the opponent tanks a little bit before throwing in the call. That's what we like to hear. So it still heads up to the river, which is the 6 of clubs, so double pair board now. The opponent checks it over to me, and you know what? I think this is still another spot to keep going for value. It might be a bit thin, and like I said, my opponent can definitely have ace-9 suited or 10-9 suited, maybe even 9-8 suited. So there are a few things we lose to, but I just think it's more likely they are going to have pocket 7s, pocket 8s, or pocket 10s, and we can go ahead and try and get a bit of thin value from them. Also somewhat possible they have like ace-king or ace-queen themselves that might want a hero call on the double pair board, being that their kicker doesn't really matter anymore. So I go ahead and make it 350, then the opponent throws in the call. I end up showing my jacks, and they end up throwing their hand in the mark. Let's go. Next hand, hijack opens it up for 20. Then I'm on the button with king-queen offsuit. I go ahead and 3-bet here. I think this is a pretty interesting spot. You could go with any 3 of the options, but 3-betting, just the better one, take the betting lead and potentially take down the pot pre-flop. And then the hijack throws in the call. So it heads up to a flop of 10-8-3 rainbow. The opponent checks it over to me, and I think this is a good spot to have a check back. Definitely could see bluffing with this hand, being that we can fold out some ace high, but I would just rather bet with some hands that have more backdoor equity, like queen jack or anything with a backdoor flush. So I check it, and then we get to see a free turn, which is the king of diamonds. Pretty nice turn. The opponent checks it over to me. Definitely want to start betting for value here, get paid off by any worse king X, and maybe a 10X that just knows this is going to be a card I want to bluff on or what. So I go ahead and make it 45, and then the hijack throws in the call. So we see the river, which is the 8 of clubs. The hijack checks it over to me again. Now I definitely want to keep betting for value. If I had any bluffs here, I would absolutely be double barreling, just because I'm going to have to balance out all of the strong kings I have in my range. And I do want to use a bit of a larger sizing, just because I think king jack and king 9 suited, stuff like that, is definitely going to call, and I just want to maximize value against those hands. So I go ahead and make it 150. Then the opponent throws in the call. I show my king queen, and then they end up throwing the hand in the mark. So we got one final hand to kick this thing off, and a loose aggressive short stack button opens it for 20. Then I'm in the small blind with ace jack offsuit. Definitely going to go ahead and 3-bet here. Pretty interesting whether we want to try and get stacks in against the shorter stack with this hand specifically. but probably a good spot to go for it against a loose aggressive opponent specifically. So I go ahead and 3-bet it to 80. Then the action gets back to the button, who rips it all in for 350. And I think once I made my mind up to 3-bet, I was already committing that extra 350. Not the best situation in the world. We're going to be crushed by ace king, ace queen, all the overpairs queen plus. But if my opponent is doing it with like pocket sixes through pocket tens, we're 50% against that, and pretty happy to try and flip for that much against a short stack. So I end up throwing in the call. Then the opponent shows ace king of diamonds. Damn, not the best hand to be against. And we've got the live run out there for you. So it's a good start with the jack of hearts in the window. Unfortunately, it is on a king high board though. So we've got 2 outs. Don't get there on the river. So GG to the villain. They end up scooping in this $700 flip. Hop in the comments below if you like getting it in with the ace jack there. Pretty close decision in my opinion. So there you have it. Those were the most interesting hands from my last session in the Adelaide trip. In terms of how I feel about my play this session, I'm going to give myself an A grade. I was really over the moon with how I played. I really needed a bounce back after the previous night's session was pretty disastrous in terms of results, but super glad that I didn't go too much on tilt. Not saying this session was totally absent of mistakes. I definitely did make a few bet sizing mistakes, particularly on rivers, where I probably lost a bit of value, or potentially even value owned myself a few times, but I was still looking for good spots to bluff, still looking for good spots to play hands more passive or make good folds, and just overall happy with my focus this session and not being distracted or tilted at all. So pretty happy to land on the A grade for that session.
Hey everyone, Lee from the future here. So the game only lasted about 6 hours before the table ended up breaking. I think on a Monday night / Tuesday morning. Not many people can afford to play poker during those hours except for professional poker players specifically, which isn't conducive to a long-term game, but I was happy to play for as long as I did because I ended up buying into the game for $1,500 and cashing out for $3,050, so very nice profit and end the trip on a winning note. So that was how I went on the last session specifically, but like I did with my Sydney trip and my Gold Coast trip previously, let's look at all the expenses and see how much money I won or lost during this trip. Spoiler alert, definitely a loss after that massive session where I had a loss, but the total expenses, including hotel, flights, and Ubers, ended up costing me $834.78. And in terms of my results from playing poker, I did end up having a total loss of $3,350, which is to be expected after I had that massive loss in the 5, 5, 10, 20, 40 game. These things happen, and it definitely did kill the trip in terms of results. Would have had a win in spite of that, but it is what it is. The total that the trip cost me after my expenses and my loss was $4,184.78, so definitely a pretty brutal loss on a poker trip. Probably one of the worst hourlies I've had whilst I've been away on a poker trip, unfortunately, and it just goes to show what I've said on this vlog before. If you plan to fly somewhere to make money playing poker, it definitely can backfire, because not only do you have to try and be a winning poker player, but you need to win enough to cover your expenses from going there. I'm happy to have a trip and check out the new card rooms in Adelaide, which I've never been to before, and honestly I had a lot of fun on the trip. Don't know if I had $4,100 worth of fun, but it was super cool to get some content for the vlog out for you guys. Really happy with the poker rooms overall. The community in Adelaide is definitely thriving, and I met a lot of cool people there who are super passionate about poker, and that's always fun. Unfortunately, when I got back from the Adelaide trip, this very second day after I got back, Melbourne went into lockdown. For 3 weeks, everything was shut down. I couldn't go to any home games. I couldn't go to the gym. And this was obviously frustrating because I couldn't get any content for the vlog out for you guys, unfortunately. Also, I think that took a toll on me mentally. Definitely killed a lot of the motivation I had to keep grinding and to keep making poker vlogs, unfortunately. But now that things have started to open up the past 2 weeks or so, my motivation's kicked back in and really excited to keep putting content out for you guys. I've been playing in the Melbourne home game, so I definitely have some footage to go through and edit it together, and we're just going to keep doing that from now on. Definitely looking to get back to a regular routine where we're getting vlogs out for you constantly. I know a lot of you have been waiting for them. You've been hitting me up in my DMs, and you've also been approaching me in person to keep putting vlogs out, so don't worry, we're going to get some more vlogs out for you guys. And I do apologise for the hiatus. I just wasn't feeling up to it mentally to keep grinding, but we're back on the horse now, so let's see if we can push through. For this vlog, that's going to wrap it up for me. Thanks for sticking to the end. That really helps my channel's analytics, and I do appreciate it. Hop in the comments below. Let me know what you think of the individual hand histories, as well as the overall trip. Really do enjoy engaging with you guys and having a discourse about poker. So hop in the comments, leave me your thoughts. But for now, I'm out of here. Peace.